Organizers say almost 2 million turned out on Sunday to demand that Lam resigns in what is becoming the most significant challenge to China's relationship with the territory since it was handed back by Britain 22 years ago.
Global affairs analyst Calvin Dark now joins me to discuss happenings, developments in Hong Kong. Good to have you, as always, on The World Now. Well, a lot of analysts have been asking what exactly the end game is to this protest beyond the push back of the extradition bill and the call for Clarrie Lam to step down. Is it a growing resentment against Chinese rule or Chinese influence in Hong Kong?
Yes, I definitely think it is. And if there's any doubt, one of the things that just really helped me see how significant this was that almost a fourth of the whole city turned out, over 2 million people. So this shows you that this is truly a popular protest, that it has the support of the people. But I also think that while the extradition bill was the specific thing that the demonstrators were protesting against, it's not the only thing. I think it represented a bit of tension between the people of Hong Kong and what they perceive as increasingly tighter Chinese rule. And I don't think it's going to stop. In fact, I want to say from one of the reports that I saw, the protests after the bill was pulled were even bigger than when they were protesting that it get pulled by Lam.
And let's even envisage a scenario. Let's even say that this bill actually did pass. What would the implications have been for a vibrant, city like Hong Kong that is both a financial hub in the region?
Well, I think the biggest fear would be that an extradition bill establishing an agreement with mainland China would essentially be a backdoor for China to suppress dissidents, pro-democracy protesters, by charging them with something that may be dubious to get them to mainland China, or at least having that threat out there to stifle protests and demonstration beforehand. So I think that was the main fear, and I think that that is a symptom of people in Hong Kong feeling that democracy is being encroached on by mainland China.
And then there was the one country, two systems policy. Is that policy now threatened by this protest?
Well, I don't think that it's necessarily threatened, but I do think that what's going to be happening we'll see over the next few days and weeks, is that defining what that relationship is, especially with the anniversary coming up, it's going to make people kind of rethink what the bounds are. So while I don't think there will be any official change in policy, including I don't think Lam is going anywhere, because while they're calling for it in Hong Kong, Beijing is not warm to that idea. I do think there will be changes in how the relationship practically plays out.
And if Lam refuses to step down, which is what the protesters are calling for, what then?
Well, I think that is going to be the big question, because I do believe that she will be speaking with the protesters, at least some representatives of the protesters, to give the appearance that she's listening. And there may actually be changes and reforms that do please, some of the demonstrators. But we have to remember that she's got the backing of Beijing, and unless something drastic happens, I don't think she's going anywhere.
And she did speak on Saturday, but a lot of observers say that it was a missed opportunity because she didn't even address the demands of the protesters. Was this like, was she playing the ostrich?
Yeah, I think she was doing what we say here in the United States, a very delicate dance, threading the needle. And I do think it was a mistake, because I believe in her address, she never actually pulled the bill. She said indefinitely it wasn't going to be brought up again, but it wasn't very clear exactly what could be the future. Maybe it could be brought up, in the next few weeks or months, even though that's unlikely. I think, though, that she did as much as she could do, because, once again, she is being directed by Beijing, so she only has so much latitude to be open and talk with protesters.
What role do you think former colonialist Britain, who held sway for over 150 years in Hong Kong, what role do you think they should be playing at this time to ensure that things don't get out of hand?
Well, I actually don't think there's much that the UK can do with Hong Kong. And let's bring in the other dynamic, is that as the UK figures out how to get out of Brexit at the end of October, one of the things they're going to be doing is strengthening their trade relationships with the United States, and imagine with China in some respect, because they already have deep trade relations with them. So I think the money's going to talk, and I think that's going to limit any at least public influence that Great Britain wants to have in the former colony.
Protesters insist that they're actually fighting against dictatorship. Do you think that is a growing concern, not just for Hong Kong, but mainland China?
Well, I think for Hong Kong, definitely, because they have gotten used to a system that is much more free and democratic than in mainland China. Now, in mainland China, there is a tightening of the leadership, and they are clamping down on democracy and human rights in a lot of areas. But the difference, unlike Hong Kong, is it's a little bit more difficult to gauge the popular dissent or being not pleased with how democracy is progressing in China, because it isn't as open for people to protest. So do I think it's probably getting more dictatorial? Yes, but we wouldn't know it by the protests in mainland China because they can't.
Calvin Dark, Global Affairs Analyst, always nice to hear your input and insight on these matters.